Now, if you're getting into surfing, the big thing to understand when you're surfing, the wider the baseboard, the more the board can be slow and higher in this whopper. A very stable board, a nice round nose, a nice and maneuver on a wave. Now, what Starboard have done to make this board work is they've thinned out the rails slightly at the tail, which is great for the bite and the drive. They've rounded off a nice round tail, which is great for the maneuverability. It's compact and easy to turn, and it's not so wide, so it's going to be able to handle speed a little better. But really, let's look at the outline shape. Let's look at the wide point. The wide point is a flatter board is just not going to cope in a small critical section of a wave. But really, the wide point range is really gearing up for more the intermediate base surfers, or the surfers who are a larger paddler but a more experienced paddler, and they know what they want to get out of a board on a wave. The rails are more thinned in at the tail, offering you a bit less volume but way more performance, way more drive on the bottom turn. Weight wise, up to 100 kilos they recommend, but really you could push up to 105. If you wanted to sort of fast track, maybe you've done a few SUP surfing days, sessions, and you want to buy a board, but maybe look towards the bigger ones if you want a bit more glide and a bit more easygoing because of catching waves early. The two standout points of when we were testing the wide point, a little bit more nose rocker, you pretty much just have to get your feet in remotely the right place, ready for the wave to come, and you just pop over it. It's very easy to get over waves. And the other thing, because of that pulled in tail, it's much more pivotal on the turns, but it's not as fast a turn as the hyper nut, which we'll speak about now. It's going to be able to do that. The other thing is to set up in a quad setup. These are both set up in a thruster setup or a 2+1. The big difference between that, a quad setup, which is two other things that I think really have helped for this 2019 model, is the swallowtail's a bit bigger, gives you a bit more grip and drive on the bottom turns. They've also reduced the back, feels way more reactive because of the weight of the board. It's lighter and it's shorter. Shorter, narrower is going to be more progressional in the waves. That's always going to be the case. But really the shape for this board sort of overpowers it being smaller, because you can get the bigger chopped off nose. You're going to be able to have to almost want to paddle out in surf stance, so you want to be able to trim the board back when the white water's coming to pop over it. So that's think, oh, I could get away with a hyper nut. Well, it's a much more technical board to surf, and then when you're surfing it, you want to be using the board a bit more with your feet. This year's board is a really nice board to surf. They have massively improved it, if you ask me, from the 2018 board. It's easier to use and to do transitions and into turns. Both the boards in the Starlight construction, still an absolute brilliant board. So strong, so tough. It's going to be able to take heavier, more hammering waves.